Hello and welcome to the virtual and in-person AWP Conference and Book Fair. I'm Chris Biak, a member of the AWP Board of Directors. For accessibility, I'd like to offer a physical description of myself. I'm a white woman with blonde hair and am wearing a blue patterned shirt. We are delighted to bring you this event today, Love, Grief, and Resistance, a reading and craft conversation sponsored by Copper Canyon Press, featuring Victoria Chang, Chris Abani, and Christopher Soto, moderated by Michael Wiegers. Our literary partners and sponsors allow AWP to present these extraordinary literary events and help us keep our conference affordable and accessible. Please give a big thank you to all of our conference sponsors and partners for their support and participation. This conversation was pre-recorded and is premiering on Saturday, March 26th from 1:45 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. After the conclusion of the event, it will be available for on-demand viewing. During the event's premiere, please enter your questions or comments into the platform chat box on the right of the screen. If you are watching on demand, feel free to continue to leave comments in the chat box to the right of the video. We thank you so much for attending and for your continued support of AWP. We hope you enjoy this event.
Hello, I'm Michael Wiegers, Executive Editor of Copper Canyon Press, and I want to welcome you to our reading today, Love, Grief, and Resistance. While I wish I were joining you all in person in Philadelphia, one of my favorite cities, it's nonetheless a pleasure to be with you here in this space. Like so many others, I miss seeing friends at AWP striking up conversations in elevators and hallways, and especially at Copper Canyon's always vibrant book fair booth. But next year we'll be in Seattle, our hometown, and I'm hoping to see you all in person as Copper Canyon Press celebrates its 50th anniversary. Today we're launching 3 extraordinary new books by Chris Abani, Victoria Chang, and Christopher Soto. In Abani's latest book, his most personal and vulnerable to date, he reaches across time and borders to mourn a brother while revisiting familial and larger cultural traditions. In Victoria Chang's latest, she interrogates climate collapse from within the liberations of strict forms. And in Christopher Soto's debut volume, he addresses the carceral state. Resisting police brutality, lamenting the loss of the natural world, and grieving across time and geography. Each of these poets' books carries tremendous weight. They radically reinvent the transformative possibilities of poetry as they collapse and expand out of the status quo. We're thrilled to be publishing Victoria Chang's The Trees Witness Everything. Her most recent is Obit, as well as the newly minted chapbook from Albion Books, Brian Tear's wonderful imprint, Another Lost Year. Obit was named a New York Times notable book and received the Los Angeles Times Book Prize, the Anisfield Wolf Book Award, the Penn Volker Award, and it was longlisted for the National Book Award and the finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award, as well as the Griffin International Poetry Award. Her previous poetry collections include Barbie Chang, The Boss, Salvinia Molesta, and her nonfiction hybrid book, Dear Memory, was recently published in 2021 by Milkweed Editions. She's a Guggenheim recipient and lives in Los Angeles, where she serves as the program director of Antioch's low residency MFA program. She additionally serves as the poetry editor for the New York Times Sunday magazine.
Hi, my name is Victoria Chang, and thanks so much for coming to our reading today. And thank you so much for the introduction, Michael. I'm going to be reading from this new book that's coming out, or probably will be out by April, The Trees Witness Everything. And as Michael said, it's a little bit of a different book. It has basically tiny little poems on each page that are in Japanese syllabic forms and of all different types. And it really is an extension of my book Obit, which came out in 2020. And that book had small tankas, which are poems in syllabic forms of 5-7-5-7-7. And this book has a whole bunch of other forms. So there are 5-7-7 patterns, 5-7-7, 5-7-7. I could keep going, but the restraint was really a fun thing to do. So I also will read a couple longer poems in the middle, and those are poems that were written when I was in Marfa, Texas. So I'll just start reading a few. Let me just make sure I turn my timer on really quickly. Hold on one second. Okay. And this is just the first. I'll start at the beginning. Far along in the story, and I should mention these are all W.S. Merwin's titles, so that was another constraint that I put on myself. Far along in the story. Once I sat in rain, opened my mouth to the sky. I yearned to be changed, but each drop was a small knife. At first I fainted, but when I woke up, all the ticking had gone, and all the centuries were won. My choices no longer hurt. This is called losing a language. We were born with a large door on our backs. When will we know if it opens? Green fields. I was supposed to return to the fields daily. I haven't been there since birth. On some nights, I smell smoke that I think is God calling me. But when I follow, there's just a clothesline with half a life clipped on it, drying in the sun. This is called convenience. Youth stretches over everything, can be used once, then we turn it inside out. Snowfall. We say the snow falls, but it really seizes. Because it is light, it takes 7 years to grab. By the time it does, the old wars are over and my mother is dead. But it lands on the new wars, melts on a different mother. Still morning. No mornings are still. The newly dead move the most. They force flowers to dilate. Thanks. Some days I can't see beyond the 2 small lemons as they pull down the branches. This is called The Shortest Night. And when I looked up, the sky had also turned black, and I had aged 100 more feet down the road. The owl was on the next tree with mirrors as eyes, in case I wanted to see my future. When I looked, I lost another year. So I'll read a couple of these middle poems, which are poems that I wrote when I was in Marfa, Texas, and they look a little bit like this. So they're in these little justified rectangles, and I think they're in that shape because I was looking at a lot of Donald Judd rectangular pieces when I was in Marfa, Texas, and it's just a long poem that's in longer sections. I'll just read a few of these, and this is just the first one. Marfa, Texas. Here there are grasses rolled into dry moons, then carted off on trailers to the edge of the rain. Here there is so much sky that even birds get lost. Oh, to be loved the way the day loves the night. See how slowly they separate? All day long the trees move, each leaf in a different direction, as if by the work of fingers on a body. How many times are bodies imagined by another mind? How many times the day imagined the night? Once I loved a man so much that when he didn't love me back, I closed my eyes and drank a whole bottle of night. How I felt night rush into my body then out through my skin as envelopes. At the time, I only felt pain, but years later, all I remember is joy, the kind of love that seems ground off of a moon. Perhaps such love cannot ever be returned, except in the imagination. And this one is the second poem in this grouping. Today I tried to open the river, but when I pulled, the whole river disappeared. I used to think that language came from the body. Now I know it is in that group of mountains across the field beyond the fence. Yesterday I saw a red-tailed hawk. When I went near it, it took the wind with it. I was left without air, but I could still breathe. I realized everything around me I could do without. I could hear the mountains, but nothing else. I saw a car start up, but I heard nothing. A gray-haired woman said hello to me, but I heard nothing. I stood and watched the hawk. It never looked at me, but knew I was there. Neither of us moved. Finally, it flew to the top of an electric pole. I realized the pole is all the years of my life, the mountains' applause, the hawk, what I have been trying to tell myself. I'll read one more from this grouping. Yesterday, while looking for the owl, I met a gelding. The horse was so still that it must have been time. I almost missed it because I didn't know I could see time. Time is the only thing that doesn't move when it moves. I stood at the fence, half hoping the horse would come over, half hoping I was the horse. I made noises with my feet. The horse turned its head to me. What are days for? Days are where we live. They are to be happy in. Where can we live but days, wrote Larkin. My day was this horse. This horse is all my days, with its bruises, tears, thin, overworked body. I pay all my debts to this horse. This horse is also all the hours of my life that are unlived. It is all human suffering at once. The horse knows this and doesn't move, doesn't come near me because suffering cannot be touched. At the courthouse, a woman saw me looking up at the tree. No owls today, she said. 2 live up there. This whole time, I had only been looking for one. One is my life, and the other is what it could have been. Maybe I'll just read the last section. And the last section is of the book is just a series of tiny, actually really tiny poems. They're all only 3 lines, and they're all grouped together in one longer poem called Love Letters. And they were actually written as part of a commissioned project called Love Letters in Light by the Los Angeles County Public Library and the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health's We Rise initiative. And the goal of it was to bring what they call messages of hope, heartbreak, resilience, and love to county residents during Mental Health Awareness Month in May 2021. So these were really cool. They're actually these small poems that went across these LED strips, and they were hung across all these libraries. I think 13 or 15, I can't remember exactly, libraries in Los Angeles County. And so it was really like analog, and you just see the poem as it was revealed. And we also, as part of this project, got to select poems from the community that we also ran across these libraries. So I'll just jump around and I'll read a bunch of these, and then I'll stop. Love Letters, and they're a little more positive, I think, than the other poems, just because they had to be. That was the point of them. Is that you crawling? Or have you finished gathering our sadness? Let me tell you a story about hope. It always starts and ends with bandages. Last year had 1,000 days. Imagine all our extra living. Hope has footprints too. Some days we follow it. Some days it follows us. All the days can feel terrifying until you realize you've done this before. Do you remember where you were last May? I do. You are here. You are alive. If you don't forgive yourself, tomorrow will still arrive, so you might as well forgive yourself. There's a reason why our skin keeps out water. We each already own enough tears. If you stand near grief too long, the pine trees might begin to notice you. Your heart had hundreds of extra beats last summer. You can use some of them this year. Maybe the large hand descending was just a crow's wing. Last year the moon was 1 inch from our faces, and we thought it would never leave. Remember the first time you saw a spider web and followed the threads to the center? When grief is very busy, it doesn't even bother to leave. Why spend your life building a room to hide in? Sometimes the stranger next to you knows you better than you know yourself. Everything always dries eventually, but this city never dries. There is a bird and a stone in your body. Your job is not to kill the bird with a stone. Some of us are made only of nerve endings. At night we light up like radium. One day you will wake up beating. One day you will wake up winged. Let me tell you a story about hope. It always starts and ends with birds. Thank you.
Thank you. That was beautiful. I'd like to ask a few questions. As we know, Copper Canyon is dedicated exclusively to poetry. So I'm always going to be interested in what goes on inside a poem as well as what's going on inside the larger poetry community. Each of today's poets is engaging in distinct formal considerations in their work. Victoria, particularly in your most recent books, you've employed some formal constraints and considerations, such as obituaries, haiku, tanka, and other forms. And Chris, meanwhile, has essentially written a book-length poem, and Christopher has blown up the line, employing disruption throughout. So starting with you, Victoria, how do you work your way into the formal choices you make? To extend that question, each of the poets today is writing into some challenging, painful spaces. Victoria, during the course of the pandemic, a challenging, painful space for so many of us, I noticed that I started receiving manuscripts from multiple poets, some of whom previously wrote in open forms, but now had started writing in received forms, or as you did in Obit, created their own forms and restrictions. So it had me wondering whether forms offer a grounding presence as we engage challenging moments, or do you think it's just a larger trend in poetry, irrespective of the pandemic? Is it coincidence, or so why are you choosing to write into the forms you're choosing now?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's hard to know sort of why other people are doing it. But now you've gotten me sort of thinking about it in the macro sense, because I like thinking about those things too. And you have the luxury of being at that level where you get to see a lot of things come through, and so you can pick up on different trends and things like that. But I think you're onto something, or multiple things, perhaps, when you say that very sort of deep, very difficult feelings and emotions, to me sometimes feel like they're so free and so wild that they're very difficult to contain, like air, right? And so I feel like it's almost impossible for me to know what to do with those very dispersed, kind of scattered, and frankly invisible feelings sometimes. And so sometimes I think I need to put those sort of, I've used this before, but like the bowling alley guardrails, like you have something to hold um, some those very broad and deep and very traumatic feelings inside that paradoxically, I think opens up, for me at least, the possibility of what is in that container. So it feels this simultaneously tension of restraint and also very deep kind of gushing within that container. And I think at, at least for me as a process, it's the only way that I know how to write right now. And that may change going forward because I certainly never wrote in forms before as strictly as I've written them. And now, and I feel like I keep putting more restraint. I mean, it's think about like the number, like to write in these very strict syllabics, but then to constrain myself with title too. Um, I felt like these were written, at least the ones from this book were written during the pandemic, right at the beginning and then throughout. And I do think that does have something to do with those deep emotions that I felt, but I couldn't really express. So, and in terms of other people, I think you could be right because when I first wrote Obit, I wrote it to not be so alone in my own grief, in my own trauma. And while I had read all these books by Joan Didion and all these great grief poems, nothing really felt like it expressed what I was feeling. So I set out to write something for me, and it came out of loneliness and desolation. And I feel like the pandemic came and suddenly I felt connected to hundreds of millions of other people. And it makes sense to me if I think about what happened to all of us together, this kind of collective grieving, that suddenly we're more similar in lots of ways, and we have more similar feelings in some ways with each other, and that some of the poetry coming out of it and the processes in which we write may also be more similar.
Yeah, it's in another situation. I'm trying to remember where you said this, but I think you said something along the lines that, the writing of the poem, that's the reward, that's the reason for writing, is the actual just the act of writing. And so in certain ways, I just wonder aloud whether or not, those formal constraints are in essence kind of a permission. You don't know what you're writing into, the times that you're writing into, the moment that you're writing into, but that device, kind of, it's almost like morning pages or something. It just gives you the space. But within those um, restraints, as well as within the understanding that the reason for writing is the writing. Is there anything that you hope that your writing does beyond yourself? I mean, you know, what 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 hope do you have in it for your imagined reader?
Yeah, I mean, this is a great question. And incidentally, the poet Dana Levin and I were just talking about something like this morning. And via text, we were talking about, um, what are we doing here? And there's so much angst around the reception of your work and the reception of you. And I keep thinking back on what is it that we're doing here, and she said something really smart, and she said something about, and I won't mention the person she mentioned because I don't know if this is for public consumption, but she said that this other person said that they have the way they think about the audience is this kind of one-on-one relationship with the audience, so like a one-to-one reader, and it got me thinking about that, and I was like, that is so true. I mean, um, if once you start expanding, the idea of audience to like the whole enterprise, and it gets really difficult to feel happy because it's just one long disappointment after the other. So when you ask me like what is, like what am I trying to do in terms of audience? I mean, I just think of just one individual person that might be reading your book or a poem of yours or a line um, in the dark and with a little lamp, and you made them feel something, anything, connection, horror, sadness, something that reflected on their own face. That's the reward, right? Beyond now, for me, the big reward is the joy and the fun of writing. And the minute we lose sight of those few things, I think the ego comes and shoves everything out of the way. So, the formal aspects, to be frank, were just really fun
Mhm.
to write. And so I think play and fun and I love writing now at this time in my life more than I've ever loved it before. And I think that's the joy. And if you get caught up in all the other crap that you can get caught up in, that's the ego. And if you start again, going back to audience and thinking about all the numbers of people, once you start counting numbers, then you've lost everything, I think. But if you think of that one person that you may touch in the dark, I think that's valuable.
Yeah.
That's something that that's what we're doing.
Yeah, I'll have to send you because I can't quote it verbatim here, but there's a great line by the Greek Nobel Prize winner Odysseus Elitis where he talked about every writer searching for their third reader, and he goes on to explain what the third reader is, and it's this unknown beloved that as a publisher, that's what similarly, I don't want to think about the numbers so much. I mean, some of my colleagues who are handling the finances may want me to, but I like to think of that individual experience that you mentioned, and imagine the third reader out there, and I think there are a lot of those within the audience at AWP. So, well, I think that will probably about wrap it up for our questions. But thank you for a beautiful reading, and thank you to everyone in the audience who is listening and watching today. And I look forward to seeing you in Seattle next year. Please come up to our table. I will likely be there, and introduce yourself, say hello. We miss you all. So thank you.
Thank you.
Chris Abani is an acclaimed novelist and poet. His most recent books are The Secret History of Las Vegas, The Face, Cartography of the Void, and Sanctificum. He has received a Guggenheim Fellowship, the Penn Hemingway Award, an Edgar Award, a USA Artists Fellowship, and multiple other awards, including a Lannan Literary Fellowship. Born in Nigeria, he is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and a Board of Trustees professor of English at Northwestern University. He lives in Chicago.
Hi, good afternoon, good morning, whatever time you are watching this. I'm perennially fussing with screens, so I'm sure we can do a little bit about it. Okay, so I thought I would just read a few poems from Smoke in the Bible. Smoke in the Bible is a book about my brother Greg, my elder brother, who passed on. That's sort of the primary focus of the book, and I sort of was with him for the last 10 months of his life, sort of easing the passage across. But it's also it's a book about brothers, about brotherhood, about masculinities, and the problematic erasure that word itself actually contains and enacts. And it's about trying to make sense of the world. So I'll just read through, and hopefully it'll touch you. All right. Flay. The point of a pen opens a hole into a soul's dereliction. This search for the right word bores through stone. Sunlight takes no measure of what is clung to. A man can place the half dome of a tomato, slice into flesh, and cut an island of loss. Migrant punished by spice and the scent of cooking, you wake up on a cold day in another country and put your faith in hot rice and braised goat, and the persistent aftertaste of a lost home. Gospels are made of less than this. But outside it is morning. A summer breeze burns down to the water, and the ocean begins. Nostalgia. A train travels through a Midwestern cornfield, yellow slants to gold as the sun leans heavy on the horizon. This meager harvest of memory and hope, the entropy of a coffee cup half spilling into a wash of half truths, a sweet decline. To have spent one's life thinking, I am the good one, the stable one. Then one morning in a city between the city you call home and the one you are traveling to, you accept you are migrant. This is where you find yourself, somewhere between coercion and an insubstantial desire, the slow decomposition that is life. Yet for now, this half light, the gentle sway of the tracks, music enough for this journey. Surgeon. The train bores through corn like a weevil, and birds hop across drooping leaves like scribes. An immigrant, I try to read origin here, but cannot. Mighty nations erased in all, but place names reduced to fit the small malice of a conqueror's heart. What will not yield to the poet's gaze must be overwritten. Sure as ink rides the sway of paper, but there in a tear in the green and yellow, a red tractor idles like a slow burning coal. Fire. That man burning on television, skin melting, somewhere between Africa and Lampedusa, flaming in the prow of a boat. You turn from the image and you say, death will find you how it wills, and it will. The chemo in you is fire too, and in the end, in someone's heart, we too must burn. Ejima, after David St. John. That way the Yoruba carve the likeness of a child when its twin dies, carve a doll for the soul still journeying across a veil of light and shade, dress it in a tunic of leather, cloth, beads, and cowries. A new birth, a new child, carried by the mother and fed with love and food and the milk from her own breast, suckled next to the living, flesh to wood, blood to grain, spirit to body. When the soul knows better how to come and go, when the spirit is warmed from anger, slowly over time, it sits by itself on the shrine, gathers cobwebs and dust and a gentle neglect. Until then, my brother, I carry your doll, a photograph of the child you were, close to my heart. And when you call in the dark, I answer, calm your soul, sing it into light. In time, you will join the album on my ancestral shrine and gather cobwebs and the dust from the dust, growing sticky from fat and from palm oil and gin, and wear your gentle neglect with a hush. Lineage. Someone has always wanted my skin. For the ego, it was a genocide of the Arrow. For the Arrow, it was a devastation of the British. For the British, it was my father's quiet revenge, blow after blow, dealt to my mother, his white English wife, rupture and repair, scar and keloid. My skin is the voice of my ancestors sounding in the well of me. My skin is a cloak, sacred painted spells. I have released the anger inside me, a bird flying across oceans, dying 1,000 deaths, but never dead. My body is the house of tomorrow. My skin is prophecy. White egret. The whole earth is filled with the love of God. Kwame Dawes. A stream in a forest. and a boy fishing, heart aflame, head hush, tasting the world, lick and pant. The Holy Scripture is animal, not book. I should know. I have smoked the soul of God, psalms burning between fingers on an African afternoon. And how is it that death can open up an alleluia from the core of a man? How easily the profound fritters away in words, and the simple wisdom of my brother. What you taste with abandon, even God cannot take from you. All my life, men with blackened insides have fought to keep the flutter of a white egret in my chest from bursting into flight, into glory. The familiar is a texture we cannot trust. A blue flame in this cold night held to the tip of a rolled up psalm ignites words to fire, to burn. You take a deep drag and time fills the air of fragrant smoke. You exhale slowly, the white cloud plumes a cloak for your hands. Passing it to me, you stretch your arm across pages, across myth and history, your shadow invisible in this deep night, but present. I remember the burning words, the Lord stretched the earth over the ocean. I inhale the chant, feel the power of a king, feel the tremor of strings and a boy's voice. But the promise of that spell is broken by the wince as you adjust your cane sore buttocks. And how is it a man can cross 50 and not have witness? And how can I see that angry man in a parking lot with a knife and a dark bit of vengeance in his heart and still be surprised by the boy in him? How did I marvel at rain and moss and taste the delight of destroying the wet cement blocks made by a man who toiled alone in a blistering hot field to fill his life with order and hope? Years later, I will hear a psalm in Heropestic Histole's voice, and I will carry forever that beautiful husk of a South African poet's voice in the well of me, a deep resounding. Words sung right can save us. Finally, the calculus of faith. In the end, I realize that every human body is a scripture. The first miracle was a mango full and weighty with ripeness. The second miracle was an onion skin sheet of paper torn from a King James Bible, filled with oregano and thyme and smoked. The third miracle was the smooth turquoise of my mother's fountain pen, the scrape of it, the insistent pull of its nib and words, glorious and alive. My fear is a hole I crawl into, a hollowed out log, a curve in a stump. But if you listen, in this book I am reading, it is raining. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. That's really beautiful, and I've been struck over and again by your book. Now having worked with you over several collections, and in Victoria's newest work, she imposes some restrictions on herself via received forms and borrowed titles. But meanwhile, in these new poems of yours, they strike me as your most personal, your most intimate, and most vulnerable to date. And while they are individual poems, it reads as a book-length poem, as an orchestration. And I guess I'm wondering, was it an intentional decision on your part to kind of get your arms around the subject, something that's painful, a big event? Was it necessary to extend the form and extend your voice? Or did you just find yourself writing toward this bigger vision. How did you come to this set of formal concerns?
Thanks, Mike. As always, you say such kind things and ask such difficult questions. So, um, so for me, the first constraint was the body, actually. And I say this because for a long time, I used to think that language preceded the body. But now I realize as I get older and as I'm confronted with certain kinds of mortalities, you realize that the body precedes everything. So the first constraint was that the I was on the night shift. So when my brother was diagnosed with cancer, it was so sudden. It came out of nowhere, and the diagnosis gave him 4 weeks, but he was able to last for 10 months and sort of close out his life. And so I flew to London to basically, and I moved in. So his wife ran the day shift to care for him, and then at 9 p.m. everybody would go to bed, and I would run the night shift till like 6 or 7 a.m. the next morning. And there was 1 hour between which he was completely unconscious. And that was when I could write, because the rest of the day I was sleeping and then I was caring for him. So the initial constraint was actually the body. The body is tired, the body is eroding. So I'm sitting next to him writing poems. Initially, they weren't even poems, they were just observations. And then I started to realize that these were poems, and perhaps I was writing a kind of history. Both it's almost like a hagiography, what they used to do for saints and others. So it's sort of him into the future where he wouldn't be there, him as he was then, and then our childhood, and sort of realizing the sort of bridge that occurs through time. So that was the initial constraint. So I think that then sort of naturally when the editing started to happen, I realized that it was on a kind of well, as you know from Scientificum, I tend to write I can write book length poems, very moved by music or even by composition. And so I started to think of it then as a kind of like what would be a requiem. And so it's a piece that you can play excerpts from, but then you can play as a whole movement. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, referencing Victoria's, her restrictions were ones that she chose essentially and worked against and into, whereas your restrictions were imposed by the moment and the days of your brother's illness.
Yeah.
So it also makes me, so the question I had asked Victoria about, I asked her who her imagined ideal reader is, and in certain regards, and I'm sure you'll correct me here, but I imagine your ideal reader here is your brother. But who are the other readers that you imagine, for this book or for any of your work?
Yeah, that's a good question. And since we're talking about Victoria, by the way, it was a beautiful reading. To be able to sort of comrade after that was wonderful, because she opened such a sacred space. Yeah, I think, is it okay to swear?
Oh,
Well, one of my first jobs was UC Riverside, and I had to teach undergrads sort of how to write memoir. And these were kids who, like me, have hyphenated identities and who were constantly worried that someone in their family would find what they'd written. And so we had a chant going on within 2 weeks of class where we would just chant together, fuck the reader, fuck the reader, to loosen ourselves. I remember the dean sort of walked into the room and looked at us and looked at me and was like, okay, just carry on, and sort of stop. But I really think that that's everything that has moved me as a reader could never have been the intention of the writer. I became a writer for multiple reasons, but most primarily, I think, as a fiction writer, because I encountered James Baldwin's Another Country in a small, dusty library in a small town in Nigeria when I was 10 or 11. And so there's no way I think writers can imagine their readers. They might want to, but you cannot. And I think that's the beauty and the mystery of things, that you make something into the world that's like an automaton. It's a spell, it's a simulacrum, and it sort of tracks people who might need it, who encounter it, and who it sometimes unlocks something for, and sometimes enrages. But either way, but you're always writing with an attendance of ghosts, so to speak. So clearly, this was written for my brother. At the time, it was also written for my mother, who he had cared for while she was passed. And my mother was a very acerbic English woman. And when I published my first novel at 16, and there was a gap of almost 20 years before my next novel, Graceland, came out. I remember when I sold Graceland, I called my mother and I said, I just sold this book, and she just went very dryly, "Oh, that's good news, dear. We were all a bit worried that you were a one-hit wonder." So, so in a way, there's always this dialogue that goes on with my mother, where I'm always like, "Look, I'm still doing it. But there are all these other ghosts that attend to you, all your own, all the traditions you write into, all the other poets who are inspiring you, all the sort of your own small sadnesses and disappointments, all the things all your own shames. There's a whole room of ghosts, and what you're hoping to do, at least in my case, is to create almost like a vortex, a space where the words themselves are merely a door that opens into some ineffable thing that I cannot even access. And that hopefully what that does is it creates a convergence. And so, but then sort of like the rigor comes from knowing all the ghosts in the room who are reading with me and kind of going, yeah.
With all that in mind, as a publisher, I can't say fuck the reader or fuck the audience. I mean that I'm in between the reader and the writer, and in service, I hope, to both of them. But I wonder, as a writer, is the form or the craft that you're employing, the choices that you're making, beyond, I forget what you just said. It was, you were just talking about the words. So beyond the words, how they're put down, how they're orchestrated on the page and across the course of the book, is that then, is that form and craft, is that the connective tissue to those ghosts in the room?
I think so. I think so. And as much as I may have sort of jokingly spoke about the reader in this way, but all of us come to literature as readers. All writers arrive as a reader. But it's sort of the way in which you give yourself permission. I often tell students when I'm working with them to think of themselves as a person and as a writer, and that these two things are sometimes separate, so you can make the transition into the space to write difficult material. And so I think part of it too is, really all art has a very simple underpinning. It's a very simple, and I use in simple, not in simplistic. I'm thinking more in terms of elegance, sort of like a rigor that comes from tradition, that comes from just the tradition of making art. Whether you're a Japanese stroke painter and you're making, it's like years and years of repeating something until things are happening, like jazz musicians who improvise because they've woodshedded for 15 years on arpeggios and things. So I think that's always the first place in, is not to think, is to stop thinking about, for me, is to stop thinking about what form it will take, but rather to sort of defeat the fear of confronting what has to be confronted on the page. And I think for me, that's always, because I'm lazy by nature. So I'm always like, well, I could go deeper, but this will do. And I think that's the first thing, because once I overcome that, you always end up with a lot of things that don't need to be there. But now you kind of have a sense of the range. And then it's like literally with a cheese cutter, you kind of press down, and all the things that are not essential to creating an experience for a person, for a reader, have to kind of go. And then this sort of more distilled thing comes. And then that's for me where the rigor really starts, because you start to think about the level of words and sort of the archaeology even of words and what certain words have meant in the past and what they mean now, and then you really start to you start to think about form in such a much more complex way, which is really not to say anything, but rather to create silence more than anything, where you have put enough vulnerability onto a page. So it's like if you think about when Victoria was talking about Judd and so sort of those sort of squares in Martha, it's to think about how a simple form, what seems like a simple form, becomes an aperture. So, because to me, I think all poetry is about things that can never be said. They never. It's the only form to me that the language is its very subject. It's sort of saying, what is it to be human? What is the constituent of a human being? And that's what the poet is looking for. So words have to be so carefully selected. And you think about Basho and all the things that they do, that this is such a what's the word I'm looking for? See, but it's sort of like it's never about the poet. This is the guiding thing about form, that what form allows you to do in sort of the rigors of craft is to erase yourself essentially from the text. It's all you, but then you erase yourself and allow the reader to fully occupy everything that is left. And then it starts to feel good. Then it starts to feel like you've earned the poem, because I feel like I have to earn my poems all the time. So yeah.
Well, that's beautiful. I think thank you for joining us. I miss you. I look forward to seeing you. I hope next year in Seattle and maybe before that if we're so fortunate.
I hope so. All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Christopher Soto is a Salvadoran poet and abolitionist based in Tovangar, Los Angeles, California. He currently works at UCLA's Ethnic Studies Research Centers. He is the editor of Nepantla, an anthology dedicated to queer poets of color from Nightboat Books, and the author of the chapbook Sad Girl Poems from Sibling Rivalry Press. He co-founded the UndocuPoets campaign and Writers for Migrant Justice, and worked at Equal Justice USA to end the death penalty. He has received the Barnes & Noble Writer for Writers Award from Poets and Writers and fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts and Canto Mundo.
All right, so before I start my reading, I want to show you the scenario. I was like running around town and the date slipped my mind and I ran into a cafe, but the cafe was too loud. And so I ran into the restroom. So this is the scenario in which I'm doing my reading because the restroom has quiet and a charger and I'm in the middle of downtown Long Beach, which seems appropriate. Anyhow, let's jump into some punk shit. Here are some poems from my debut poetry collection, Diaries of a Terrorist. It's coming out in May 2022. Barebacking the bar back. Were his retired slut on food stamps forever, sniffing horse tranquilizer, seeing digital dreams. This sweet and cherry boy pussy is a great machine. Twice faggots chased down the nude avenue, stalked and photographed, buying burner phones, the cellophane sound of cyber threats, entropy, and the new brutal black midnight. Public crying. We spoke literally. We lost obsidian and a job on the dark web. We were harassed, scissoring our femme queen, and he violined a bit nervously. The sky is a constellation of arrows. Something gold feathers forgive us. Forgiveness. Forgive us for speaking we spoke. Smelling like dog piss and disappointment. Everyone's hurt. Spat diamonds on the sand. Hell is temperate climate compared to this life without you. All right, I'll read another poem. from the bathroom of a cafe in downtown Long Beach, it feels really appropriate for me. This poem is called Orgies for the Elderly. Swayed by the world's ugliest models, and finally enjoying the mediocrity of ourselves. We sold art for aristocracy, and some days we were so desperate for touch, breastfeeding mothers made us jealous. Should be more ashamed, we know. We look our anus in the ugly and it was looking back at us. How we shifted from desire to desire until there was no more wanting. Ghastly scared of being stuck like a blowfish in plastic rings. Do you know how to scare an octopus? Ask about its future. Memory swam by, a silver shark we didn't want to touch. We took out the trash, took out ourselves. We got arthritis while jerking him off. Our dentures dropped on his pubes and we drooled like a little dog. We came with our walker and a mountain of Viagra, then sucked until the slow celestial release. While Zapatistas sang their hymnos in Chiapas, we got life advice from pregnant teens. Only salt for sugar daddies. Thursdays we knelt like a horse braiding its hair in the cypress tree. Horses are unicorns that lost the war. Always next up in the poverty line. We watched our culture sell on the stock exchange, becoming recycled TV memories. Each cloud dreamt of solid form, to forever love gay collage boys, to forever pray beneath the Pope's glitter thong. And I'll read one more. Oddly, I'm really enjoying the chaos of the morning and my reading space. Nina Simone in, I believe it was a Montreal Jazz Festival, or was talking, what did she say? She goes, "Do you not understand the conditions which it takes to produce a song like this? I'm vehemently against the conditions which it takes to produce a song like this, God damn it." And so as I'm reading from the bathroom in downtown Long Beach, after having been priced out of my home of Los Angeles, and I'm reading these poems, it just seems so apt. Do you not understand the conditions that it takes to produce a poem like this, God damn it? This will be my last one. Two lovers in perfect synchronicity. Figure 19. In 1991, Felix Gonzalez Torres made an installation in memoriam of his boyfriend, Ross Laycock. The installation was made of candies individually wrapped in multicolored cellophane. The pile of candy weighed 175 pounds, or Ross's ideal body weight before contracting AIDS. Throughout the day, visitors to the gallery ate the pile of candy and therefore diminished the body of Ross, depleting his weight like AIDS did. Then at night, when everyone left the gallery, the curators could choose to replenish the pile of candy, restoring Ross to his original weight and granting him eternal life, or not. This poem is dedicated to our queer mentors that we never had a chance to meet, especially Ross and Felix. We were born the month Ross died in Los Angeles. Our baby back toasted and tattooed. Our neck sweat, sweet, wet back, beaner spick, speaking Spanglish. Our clothes clinged on the clothesline, the swing swung on the swing set. We were wearing beach sand, dollar, sand, crab, summer skin so tanned. We were born, and Felix was mourning Ross, the lost hymn of him. Pour one out, y otra, barriga, pa' abajo, centro, free tequila for the kids, spray painting our names at the wash, vegan snacks at the punk show. We wanted to believe masturbation is sex with someone you love, but still were a part of a whole generation of queer youth being raised without elders. Who's Ross? To us, A whole generation lost to AIDS, Our Lady of Constant Descent, a little gory allegory. Hugo, our true love, Jugo de Naranja. When we broke up, he broke down. We were all ribs and on the barbecue. He played the xylophone with his tongue. Inflatable pool in the front yard. Yellow grass, cage macaws, palm trees, tilted pool tables, the dog with knotted hair. Chanclas with socks on the beach, seashell buckets, cocinando pupusas con mamá, bebiendo con la champán, the boombox, Pokemon, graffiti wall, skater boys, no shirt, boning, that's greyhounds, Hugos, black boxers peeking, cut out of Dickie shorts he rode on the pegs of our bike, the ice cream truck over Celia Cruz, piñata, tarot cards, hoop earrings, and aerosol spray. We reapply eyeliner like a chola before mall photos, eloteros, football, Sunday church, bachata, cumbia, no rain. Theo transcribed at the seance. We pretend to get stigmata. Oh, Los Angeles. Oh, Hollywood Hills. Oh, Placita Olvera. Oh, San Pedro. Oh, Long Beach. Oh, downtown Long Beach in the bathroom of a cafe. Oh, Taqueria in Westminster. Oh, the 405 freeway, left arm sunburnt, windows down. We were on the beach chairs, beach coolers, beach buttons, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, witch chips in the sand. Pringles, Ruffles, vodka, watermelon, suntan, lotion, and we laugh with towels over our head. Police said, "You drunk? You high?" We reply, "No, we're Salvadorian." Police harass us so much, we stop driving, we stop biking, we move to a different city. Police ask driver's license, our red rub eyes, our brown skin, our brown. We didn't jog the stop sign. We didn't pass the speed limit. Our music wasn't too loud. No queremos hablar contigo, jodón. And it's amongst these conditions we love. We try to. I'll stop there. Thank you all.
Hello, Christopher. Thank you for that. As there's probably somebody on the outside of that door waiting to use the bathroom, I'll try and keep it a little brief here. I can get long-winded in my questions. And you're writing into some, as Victoria and Chris Abani both have done. You're writing into some really challenging, difficult spaces, and you're reading from a challenging space too right now. Whereas Chris has extended into a book-length sequence, and Victoria has condensed into the limitations of form and assumed titles. I think I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about what I see in your work. You're kind of exploding the line, so just the unit of composition as a way to get to these larger subjects and larger truths. And I'm wondering if you can talk with us about those choices, the formal choices, or the considered choices that you make in your writing.
Yeah, I think for me, sometimes like former craft almost feels like what I need to justify the merit of the words in relationship to a white supremacist publishing industry. And so what that feels like for me is like, all right, if I have, a tight line here, if I have a pretty sound or pretty image here, then it could be computable as worthy of a particular publication, merit, award, or whatever. So craft for me so often just feels like a negotiation with whiteness, which feels very unsettling. But I think that's me thinking about how I came, experiences through the MFA program and then publishing in more of a national or international level. But when I think about choices that I had where I felt a particular agency over those choices, Some of those kind of craft choices come with like the desire to put this debut poetry book all with the we pronoun instead of the I pronoun. And the reason why I make that distinction between some of the more like lyrical decisions in craft as opposed to like the decision to change the pronoun choice is like the decision to change a pronoun choice was saying like this isolated American self in a colonial West, like cowboy figure does not resonate with me. I'm not writing from a stand place of just the lone I. And I decided to shift to the we so that the poems become the smallest fragment of what's important and what's being discussed. For me, what is important is, you know, the life of the individual, and the poem is like the leftover, the residue of that life. And in this book, what I'm trying to do is capture the life of queer, trans, people of color, Latinos in LA, those of us who have been targeted by the police state, who are living and breathing, you know, hyper surveilled and restricted lives in contemporary American capitalism. And so the we pronoun felt like a particularly important craft choice because of its political resonance. And sometimes when I do other things in craft, they feel like negotiations of whiteness. So I think it kind of matters in which ones I do. And maybe as I grow as a writer, I'll give less negotiations.
And so with that in mind, you know, the who is your idealized, using the we pronoun, the, you know, collective pronoun, is your idealized reader also the writer? So are they one and the same?
Sure, I'm not going to say no in that. Right now, I think a beautiful transition or thing that I'm working on right now is I've been, you know, living part-time in El Salvador, and I'm producing what we're calling a Salvadorian trans-triptych. So I'm working with a visual artist who is making these paintings, and then I'm laying poems on top of that. And then we're working with another trans designer to help like design the poems on top of the paintings. And I'm like, this is really like, how am I going to publish that in a book? How am I going to distribute? It just makes no sense. It's just art for the sake of art. And for me, I wanted to do something like transnational, transgender, all of the transes, because it brings in that communal element, and the visibility of it is like the least important fragment. So that feels like a natural extension from this book, diving more into the communal. But I think, again, it feels like a negotiation with whiteness and capitalism, because I'm producing this project and then I'm like, shit, how am I going to publish it? How do I get a paycheck? How can I sustain my life as a writer or a reader? So I think these are things that I always get caught up in.
Understandably. Well, we're running out of time, but I look forward to that project, and you know, and you getting outside the confines of that bathroom. But I hope the rest of your day is as lively as this past half hour. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay, take care.